This is the story of a West Coast town with untold riches. A story of boom and bust and unfinished business, with ghosts that still whisper. About the little town with a big spirit and the people who keep it alive.
I feel like I'm coming home. I was 4 when we left here, the place that my family loves so much. Every Friday we would go to town for supplies. There were 11 hotels on the way home, and when we got to the Blackwater Hotel we knew it wasn't far to come home. There's some very good memories and there's lots of old ghosts.
Waiuta might not look very much today, but in the heyday of the mine, this was a thriving community. It produced 750,000 ounces of gold, and for its time, it was the biggest gold mine in New Zealand. In today's terms, that would be equivalent to $1.6 billion worth of gold. Back in the days of developing gold mining on the coast, local mining associations were given subsidies by the government to send people out into the bush looking for gold. In 1905, a group of prospectors were up here, stopped by a small creek for lunch. One of the prospectors, quite by chance, found a bit of quartz containing gold in the creek bed. This is literally the spot where the original prospectors found gold-bearing quartz, a bit like this quartz sample here. This team of 4 miners, of which one was Jimmy Martin, happened to make this discovery on the birthday of the King of England, and so this is how it became known as the Birthday Reef. This is one of the original prospecting shafts, and here is the Birthday Reef. So this is the actual quartz of the Birthday Reef, just below the surface, sitting on top of a $1 billion ore body.
News travelled fast. Speculator Percy Kingswell heard of the find in the Reefton pub and bought the claim for £2,000. He on-sold a 6-month option to London-based Consolidated Goldfields for £30,000.
So Consolidated Goldfields really put in a major effort. They had teams of people down here putting shafts down and exploring along the line of the reef to see whether they were going to exercise that £30,000 option. So this is where the original prospectors in 1906 put in a trench along the top of this ridge trying to find where the reef came through, and sure enough they found it right in the middle of this spot.
You know, this is the Birthday Reef. You know, it was New Zealand's richest ever gold mine. You know, people talk about this mine all around the world.
The Birthday Reef is 1 kilometre long, in a long, straight, almost continuous reef. This stands out as, you know, one of the major quartz reefs of the world. Unfortunately, Jimmy Martin and his mates really didn't come out of this as rich men. They wanted to get their money there and then and move on.
It was one thing to discover gold, but another to recover it. There were immediate logistical issues. The seam was remotely situated on an isolated plateau above the Blackwater Valley. The first task was to improve access to the outside world. Native forest was milled to build everything: the mine, Tramways, water races, buildings, the whole town.
Oh, that's the Blackwater shaft, yes. That's the one before you went up the hill. I had 2 stints at Waiuta, half a summer in end of 1948, I think it was, and the full summer in 49-50. The first boarding house I stayed at was up on the left-hand side of the road. I don't know which house it was. Having gone to the mining school, we have to get some practical experience, and the manager of the mine always put us with an experienced miner.
The first mine shaft was known as the Blackwater shaft. Situated in the middle of Waiuta, it was fully operational by 1908. In the 1920s, the mine was extended with a new claim purchased to the north. The Prohibition shaft was sunk on the hill above the township. It was the main shaft at Waiuta by 1938 and became New Zealand's deepest mine shaft. A third of it was below sea level.
Well, it was an 8-hour shift. You walk into a cage on surface and you drop down underground. And the cage might have 2 or 3 different stations to drop at, various people getting off. There was one occasion I got an awful fright. I don't know exactly how the winder drivers work, but my understanding was if they do it correctly, they turn on the electricity and there's some sort of a handle or lever, and they start off slowly and gradually work up to speed, you see. And I don't know what happened on this particular morning, but we were all in a cage, and all of a sudden we dropped. Nothing gradual, we dropped. And then the brakes were suddenly put on. And boy, we stopped, we bounced about 3 times. And the winder driver must have woken up. But goodness gracious, talk about one hell of a fright.
Feels wonderful to be back here again. Yes, I remember lots of activities around here. My father worked in the mine and my aunt and uncle had the bakery shop, and that's how my mother came up to Waiuta. She came up here to work for them.
This was a busy little town, had a butcher, baker, general store, drapery shop, everything really that one needed. And this was the barber's shop. And you know what they say about being in that barber's chair? A lot of storytelling goes on, maybe a lot of old ghosts.
Well, it was my father that was raised here, and he would have you believe the centre of the universe was a place called Waiuta. My great-grandmother built the hotel here in about 1914.
I think Waiuta was probably fairly typical of most small mining towns, in that the pub was an important part of the community.
Well, that's the hotel that my great-grandmother built. The tradesmen that were working on it finished up the court were working on Sunday. We were allowed to work on Sunday in those days. My father was raised by his grandmother, and one of his jobs was to sit out the front on the front doorstep and warn his grandmother when the police were coming up the hill.
Where those big trees are, that was my father's hedge, so that was where I lived. Both sides of the family lived here for about 20 years. They had grown up and got married here and attended all the balls and things.
My grandmother came out from Cornwall. There were 4 boys and 3 girls, I think. Grandma came out by herself because her husband, Granddad, had come over earlier.
There were the Dalmatians, the Englishmen, particularly the Cornishmen, and I guess they were people from Yorkshire, Australians, My father always said Waiuta was a League of Nations. There were people from all over the world arriving here.
This could be Joss Divis standing here. Sometimes he stood in his own photographs.
One of the most important people to live here was Joseph Divis. He was called Joss Divis by the locals. He may not have been the most important person then, but he's incredibly important now because he was a photographer. He recorded this place in its heyday with many, many houses and a peak population of 601. He was born in 1885 in a very small town called Orlik near Prague. In those days it was called Bohemia. And he came out in 1909, he would have been 25, and he was a miner. And then over the next 18 years he came and went from Waiuta. In 1930 he became a permanent resident here and lived here for 35 years.
Joss Divis was our famous photographer. He captured every moment, family life, the town, the people. He left Waiuta a legacy and it's still continuing today. And we're very, very grateful for the heritage that he's left Waiuta.
It's amazing to think of what was here when you look around and there's nothing. So here one day, gone the next. Waiuta was a company town. It was based on the value system of the English-based company, and they had a two-class system. There was staff and there were workers. The staff tended to live up on what they called Knob Hill, whereas the workers tended to live in other parts of the town, many of them in the more lower-lying swampy areas, and their houses were a lot more basic. Would have had no running water inside. They had to collect water from an outside rain tank and they would have had a toilet out the back.
My father was Joe Barron, one of the top 4 miners here. And our house is Bill's Cottage. Most of the houses were owned by the mine and rented out. But Dad, being one of the top miners, he had that one built. And in 1934, we shifted in there. And then I started school down the road in 1935.
You could see a speck of gold now and again. We had a cat lamps. Apart from that, it was dark, yes. But that didn't worry you. The reef was mainly quartz, of course. And it, from memory, was about 3 feet wide.
To recover gold, the quartz needed to be broken underground.
Fortunately, I grew up on a farm, so I was not unaccustomed to hard work. You went underground and to the working place and got your jackhammer and started drilling holes for the explosives. You used a tamping stick, I think we called it, and pushed them into the hole and placed a detonator, and when the time came to blast, you got out your box of matches and lit the lighter and made a quick exit from the stope. As the various explosives went off, you count to make sure they all went off, and you just go back and shovel the dirt down the chute, where it's collected down below on trucks.
The Blackwater Company was run from London. Every month, the local management here in New Zealand had to report back to London as to how much gold they recovered.
When they saw that the plates were looking a bit thin on it, they went to the jeweller's shop. It had a gate on it because it was ritual and it was kept locked. They used that jeweller shop as a bank, which used to sweeten up the monthly return, so that they always had a steady output month by month.
Oh yes, that's us having our crib, if you like, at lunchtime. Now, I think the origin of the word crib was that at some stage of the piece there was no time allowed to stop work. So people used to crib time to have their lunch. Hence it was known as crib time.
There's a lovely story about crib time and an old miner called Alf McGee. Alf was a very good dancer, and at the Waiuta dances he was very popular with the ladies who loved to be swung about the dance floor by him. Alf's mate Harry couldn't dance to save himself, so he decided to do something about it. At crib time, Alf gave Harry dancing lessons. In the dim light, deep beneath the surface of the earth, they danced and practiced. And you know what? The story goes, Harry's popularity at those dances grew tremendously.
When my grandmother first arrived, and her oldest daughter was about 15 at the time, they had lived in cities of Newcastle and Halifax and Nova Scotia, and they came to this bush town and didn't know what on earth they had come to. Apparently it rained for a month and their tears rolled down the hill as well with the rain.
Women's roles at Waiuta were very well defined. I'm not sure that we would tolerate it today, but in some ways it kept life simple. There wasn't a lot of choice. If you were a woman at Waiuta, you were the carer and the homemaker. It was a very accepted role and it was a very strong role.
I can't remember anybody complaining, because my memory of walking around these streets as a 3 or 4 year old with my aunt was happy people.
And yes, it would have been a hard life in terms of domestics, keeping the house going, having to cart water, cook on an open fire, keeping a house warm, doing the washing, all of that. It would have been very hard. There's no way that we would tolerate that today. But they did, and they made the most of it.
My grandmother lived beside the school on one side, and we lived on the other side. And I had my uncle and his family lived across the road from me. We had lots of relations in Waiuta.
My mum and dad met at a dance, probably on a Saturday night. That's where all the young ones went in those days.
They did an amazing amount of fundraising, and Waiuta was well known as a great party town in the best sense of the word. There were fantastic balls that attracted people from all over the coast, and fabulous dances and concerts and theatres and all sorts of things that happened in the Miners' Hall. It was very, very well known as a great place for entertainment.
It was a self-contained little town, a great social life, and people used to come from Big River, 3 hours walk away, over to watch the movies.
We used to have movies at the picture theatre here, and then we'd push the chairs away to the side and Ted Fulsham or some of them would start playing, and then you danced on, and there'd often be a baby in a pram in the ladies' toilet or behind the seat, and you just went, the kids went too, and then they'd finish up at somebody's place. You'd be cooking bacon and eggs for the horde that had come back to your place.
And of course, always you'd have the background noise of the machinery operating, and especially when the stamper battery was operational, it would have been a hell of a noise. So, yeah, it would have been an interesting place.
Our parents never worried about us getting lost in the bush. We'd go for miles, in the bush.
And we used to go up these streams and catch crawlies and boil them up in the billy.
And I remember they told us, if you ever get lost, follow the river down or creeks and you'll come out.
I remember having the run of the town with my cousins. Everybody knew who we were, and we played in the creek. went to the swimming pool. This is the Olympic-sized swimming pool that the men of Waiuta built for the community. Had a diving board up there, steps that went right down, and across there was a whole lot of bracken that people used to sit and lie in the sun in. The water was always black. It had that tannin look, which was quite frightening when you were young, because you obviously couldn't see the bottom. We nearly lost our lives on this swimming pool when it was iced over in the winter.
The class system followed through to recreation in that the staff had their own tennis courts. They were on the other side of the mullock heap here, and the public tennis courts for everybody else, they were down at the edge of the recreation ground, and the workers had to build those themselves. There was a hospital at Waiuta. My understanding is that the hospital cost £1,000. And from what I've read, it seems that the people of this community contributed half of that amount. That's a commitment to a town. And I think that's one of the reasons why the town had such strong community spirit, was because they made these contributions to their own town. They made their town.
They were great sports people, and they won lots of national titles, boxing and rugby.
We had Ron King, who was the first boy born in Waiuta in 1909. He was an All Black captain.
They were real terrors of the Grey Valley in terms of rugby league.
They had the croquet, they had the bowling club, they had the basketball, which was 9-a-side in those days. They had lots and lots of sports.
A great social life.
There was plenty to do, I think, on the weekends, yes, more than plenty.
Yes, I played cricket. And they asked me what I used to do, bowling a bat. I used to bowl a bit. So blow me down, they gave me the ball to bowl the first ball. I got back and set down my ball. I'm left-handed, you see. I don't know what happened, what I did to the ball, but I could see it making its way down to the wicket, and the chap at the other end didn't know which way to do, and he did this, and he was bowled first ball. My reputation was made.
On a Sunday afternoon, it was like a ritual that my dad would take me up to the Prohibition. We would go up the miners' track and we would see the canaries that were up there. They would put the little canary in the cage and take them down the mine. There wasn't a lot of accidents in the mine. There was only 8 in 45 years, which isn't a lot in those days.
The big thing always that caught them all, whether they were lucky to dodge accidents, of course, was phthisis, or miner's complaint as it was called in those days.
In this mine, the drill that was first introduced was called the Widowmaker, because it created so much dust which affected miners' lungs.
The big killer in quartz mines was nothing more than dust, and that was what the miners digging the rock got. And the dust gets on your lungs, gives you a form of silicosis. It was known around here as miners' phthisis, and there was no cure.
There were a lot of deaths, a lot of men finished up in the Reefton Cemetery through phthisis. And a lot of men were going on the pension and were seeking out the pension at that stage.
So there was a lot of widows up here because their husbands had passed away early because of the dust that was down the mine.
When it was worked out why, and they used a lot of water, and they kept spraying the faces with water. The water turns the dust into mud, and the mud won't hurt you. It'll make you dirty, but it won't hurt you.
The miners extracted the quartz from the earth. The next step was to extract the gold. In the early days, the rock was processed at the Snowy River Stamper Battery. Far below the township, the water-powered battery of iron stampers pounded the rock to a powder. Then the gold was extracted using mercury and cyanide.
That is a piece of quartz with the gold in it. You can see the gold. That's an exceptionally rich piece of quartz. Most of the time you can't actually see the gold. This is a much smaller version of the same sort of machine that worked at Snowy River for getting the gold out of solid rock. This one is driven with water, the same as the Snowy battery was driven, and it crushes the rock and then catches the gold. And the water goes in the back with the rock, and there's a fine slurry washes out, and it washes across copper plates coated with mercury. Mercury has a great attraction for gold, so while that slurry is washing across the copper plate, any clean specks of gold, the mercury just grabs it and holds it. When you think you've got enough, then you do shut the machine down, and then you physically have to scrape the amalgam mercury and gold off the copper plate. On the hand is a small piece of amalgam, and that's 2 parts mercury and 1 part gold. Doesn't look anything like gold, no.
The amalgam was then heated in a retort, which turned the mercury into vapour. What was left was gold, which was then turned into gold bars.
Below us we can see the remains of the Snowy battery where the quartz was crushed and the gold recovered. Capturing the gold on the mercury, we only recovered probably 50% of the gold. The cyanide tanks was to recover the remaining gold that came off the amalgam tables. Each of these tanks would be filled with sand-like material and leached with cyanide for a number of days to recover that remaining gold. Back in the days the battery was working, many of the families of the workers lived down here. So every day the children used to have to climb the 199 steps to get to school come winter or summer.
With the arrival of the Prohibition mine high above Waiuta, an aerial ropeway was constructed to transport the quartz directly to the Snowy River battery for processing. As technology improved, the Snowy battery was superseded by a modern ball mill. This was built at the Prohibition mine site.
The ball mill is a big advancement on a stamper battery technology. Stamper batteries sort of run between 50–55% recovery, and this ball mill was up to 98% recovery of gold, so it was a big advancement. So this is the ball mill, which was built in 1937. The ore ended up coming out through into what's called the Edwards roaster, which is the long sloping structure here. The gold was encapsulated by sulfides, so to crack the sulfides they heated that ore up, and one of the byproducts of that process is the creation of arsenic fumes. Yeah, so the gases were forced around into the condensing tower, and that's where they stayed basically. We ended up with 50% pure arsenic crystal. The arsenic fumes were sort of free to roam wherever the wind took them. Some of the fumes headed off down to the township, and one of the families used to see these little crystals on the sheets of the washing when she's hanging the washing out. What happened was one of the 2 daughters that they had kept on ending up in Reefton Hospital with unknown ailments. The daughter was being exposed to arsenic crystals on her sheets. One of the symptoms of arsenic poisoning is sniffles and that sort of thing, and of course the other end is that you end up peeing blood or dying. So we inherited a site which we were basically unaware of in terms of its toxicity. The concentration that we found on site was nearly 600,000 parts per million, and so it was deemed to be the world's worst waterborne arsenic site. It is was a photo showing one of the workers raking out the what they call the heavies, and he's not wearing any protective clothing whatsoever. And when I put it in the Friends of Waiuta newsletter that this was the dangers of arsenic, he wrote back from Australia, being a 91-year-old, saying, well, I'm still here, and you know, it's not so dangerous after all. Yeah, we just had a chuckle and thought, well, he'll probably never rot when he's in the ground, so yeah. So we've taken away the element that was most dangerous, so it's perfectly safe, and this is the result, so really happy with it.
I can remember when Waiuta closed, it was a sad day for all the residents in that July day of 1951.
On July the 9th, 1951, the south shaft collapsed, which cut off all the mine services. In an instant, all the necessary power, water, air, everything else were cut.
The mine was roaring along at a great pace and making money. There was plenty of gold, and suddenly it closed. It was a huge shock.
However, the Blackwater mine had lost most of their good miners to the war effort. Through the war years, it had to pay a gold tax, and wages of the miners had been fixed right through the Second World War. So the collapse in the south shaft basically spelt the death knell of the mine within a 24-hour period.
The people knew that this gold mine was no more, so they up and left.
Families were just separated, didn't know where you were going, what you were doing.
No mine, no town. So they went to other mining jobs.
Homes were relocated to all over the west coast. When the mine closed on that July day, there were 55 children at the school, and by the end of the year there were 8 children left and 5 belonged to the teacher. So they must have exited the town very quickly.
We left in '49. I was 9 years old, and we left before it closed down. And Dad never sold the house because he thought, oh well, he'll just keep it, maybe we'll come back. And when it closed down, he came back and he got £100 for the house.
When they knew the mine was no longer going to open, they marked the end of the mine in the town with a ghost town ball. It was their way of finishing their life here.
We regularly came up to Waiuta, very regularly on a Sunday, I think it was. And of course there was Joss Divis still living here in Dick Willen, and people would automatically bring them supplies.
This is where another of Waiuta's characters lived after the mine closed. His name was Dick Willen, commonly known as King Dick. And I visited him in 1972 with a friend who luckily knew to bring 2 bottles of sherry. He was waiting for us at the gate when we arrived in the car. When he saw the 2 bottles of sherry, his eyes lit up, and 1 bottle was squirreled away very quickly, but the other one he generously shared with us. We had spent the afternoon yarning away about Waiuta days. Joss bought this house in 1930, the mine closed in 1951. But he loved the place so much, he loved Waiuta so much that he stayed on. A few years after the mine closed, he was in charge of the post office and the town's telephone. In 1965, Joss Divis could no longer live on his own, and he went to Refton and died a couple of years later. The house now, sadly, is in a rather dilapidated condition, which is sad because this is a key piece of heritage structure for Waiuta, and that this is where the photographer lived.
We would come up here and of course there'd be just ruins. Things were just disintegrating. Around about 1986, Friends of Waiuta were formed. They were wanting to do a reunion.
I'd like to welcome everybody here tonight on behalf of the Friends of Waiuta and the New Zealand...
I think the Friends of Waiuta are absolutely critical. If it wasn't for the Friends of Waiuta, I don't think we would even be here really. I think the place probably would have been forgotten about.
Right from the start, this looked like the sort of weekend you'd remember for the rest of your life.
When people left Waiuta, a little bit went with them in their hearts. This town has just got something special. It's got that serenity, I think, that draws people in. And we have members who didn't live here, have no relations here, and travel from quite a far distance to attend our Waiuta meetings and to continue to support what we have here in this little town of gold.
So where was your house, Kath?
Right there. Those trees there used to hide an outside toilet.
Oh, right, yes, the long drop.
Yeah, no, a can.
Oh, only a can?
Only a can that my father used to empty. And he always wanted to be buried in Waiuta. I said, when you die, we'll have you cremated and we'll sprinkle your ashes in Waiuta. So that's what we did, in a clump of bushes over there.
Typical Waiuta day can be sunny, rainy, but that's Waiuta, and that's how people lived their lives up here. So we're here today for the annual general meeting of the group Friends of Waiuta. We support the publication of books, we support the publication of this documentary, and it's really much about fellowship and friendship. There's a lot of social history around the place. People lived their lives here, and when it closed in the 50s, the mine disappeared, the houses disappeared, the people disappeared, and they've gone around all around the world. And we've still got people in our group who actually live at Waiuta, and that's fantastic to have them still alive.
My great-great-grandfather, William Anthony Mates, was one of the four that discovered the mine in 1905, and I believe he actually named the township. He was a postmaster, and he was given a choice of different names, and Waiuta was the choice that was made. So yeah, it's great to be connected with a bit of history like that, so it's very, very special.
I think it's just special that something unites us as you know, we're quite diverse people, but it absolutely unites us because we can whakapaka back to the ancestors that lived here.
I have got permission to have my ashes buried under the rhododendron tree at Bill's cottage, which was outside my bedroom window. So they've given me permission for that, so we'll be back again.
We're just replacing the veranda flooring. I was born here in Waiuta, and this was our house in 1945 till 49 when we left. So I actually lived here with 3 sisters and a brother. Dad sold it after we left, and then the girls took it over as a holiday house, which they had for 50 years.
A lot of the old places got moved out, but there's still the odd one or two that are here, and if people come here, they want to see something.
I think the future of Waiuta in the short term is tourism. There's a lot of things to do here if you're somebody who likes exploring old relics and you like the rusty old bits of machinery. It's a really interesting place. The Landmarks project is a marketing and promotional project which is driven by Heritage New Zealand and the Department of Conservation. I think that's crucial in getting people here.
Yeah, Waiuta has been promoted for landmark status. It'd be a great achievement because it's worthy of being a landmark site. We've got to measure the distance of all the tracks and the times it takes to do them, because in terms of a landmark status site, you've got to tell the public exactly what to expect. For me, it's about the development of New Zealand in lots of ways, because like without the gold, New Zealand wouldn't be where it is today. But you've got all these relics here that tell a story, and once that story starts to get told, people might appreciate their heritage a bit more. It doesn't just start at Waiuta, it's the whole of New Zealand story.
It would have meant a lot to my family for Waiuta to be reopened and to be recognised again.
Well, there's lots of places that have been and gone. They're lost, they're forgotten, and here's one that won't die. And so to think that, you know, my great-grandmother, my father were here, and there's an absolute commitment to keep this place going, I think that's wonderful. You can write a book and that'll be forgotten, but if it actually exists here and people can come and visit it, well, great.
How much gold is down there?
Oh, well, there's more there than ever come out of it.
Yeah. Lot more. We don't know. They never knew how far the reef went. They had no way of investigating it.
The old-timers always said that it would reopen.
It's taken the best part of 70 years to get to the point where we're almost ready to start heading back down there. We're starting in the Snowy River Valley, about 3.5 kilometres away from Waiuta. We will tunnel down, and our target at this stage is the base of the old Prohibition shaft. So effectively where the old time was finished is where we're going to start. We think there's about 1.5 billion of revenue based on today's exchange rate. We will expect a workforce of somewhere between about 110 and 120 people, producing about the same amount of gold that the old timers produced in 45 years. We'll do that in about 10.
There's been a lot of holes drilled from the surface to prove the gold still extends for another 800 metres below the old mine itself.
I've seen the core sample from the 1.3 kilometre drill they put in, and it's very nice. You can see pure gold on it.
Each of those drill holes costs $800,000 to $1 million each. So it's not practical to be able to prove a new mine by surface drilling.
Obviously they're not going to go down the old shafts.
The only way to do that is by putting in tunnels down to below the old mine and actually doing a lot of underground exploration work.
The tunnel from here to get to a Prohibition shaft is about 3.3 kilometres.
So we are going full circle from 1951 to 2020.
It's very environmentally friendly, almost zero impact. Even though we're going to tunnel under the old Waiuta town, nobody will know we're there.
For heritage in Waiuta, it's a very good thing. I'm not quite so sure about the environmental side of it, but surely these days they're not going to do what they did up at the ball mill 50 years ago. This is going to sound a bit flaky, but there is still a lot of really good energy here, and I think that's probably something to do with the geography and the geology. There's a part of me that likes to think that the spirit of the people is still here.
The spirit of Waiuta is always strong, and memories are worth more than gold.
Those were the times, those were the ways. So take me back to the good old days. Looking back from here, I can see that we were blind to the burdens we would shoulder and the struggles we would find. But growing made us strong as strong can be. Those were the times, I wish we could have stayed. Take me back to the good old days.